At 40, I found a box in my parents' attic that proved I was kidnapped, and my real family never stopped searching for me. Welcome to Adoptions from Reddit, where real adoption stories come to life. Here, you'll hear true stories from people who experienced adoption from different perspectives. Adoptive parents discovering unexpected truths, adoptees finding their biological families, birth parents sharing their journeys, foster care experiences, reunion stories, identity struggles, and all the emotional complexity that comes with adoption. Stories of loss and love, of finding where you belong, of difficult decisions, of heartbreak, of healing, and the raw reality of adoption. This is a real story, shared anonymously on Reddit. Some details have been changed to protect the identity of the people involved. My name is Rebecca. I'm 40 years old. I live in Chicago, Illinois. 6 months ago, I discovered something that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. A box hidden in my parents' attic. A box filled with secrets that had been buried for 4 decades. A box that proved my entire existence was built on a lie. I wasn't adopted like they told me. I was taken, stolen from a hospital when I was 2 days old. And somewhere out there, my real family had been searching for me for 40 years. Never giving up hope, never stopping. Always believing I was alive, always believing I would come home. Let me tell you how I found out. How my world came crashing down. How everything changed in a single afternoon. How I discovered that Rebecca Foster never really existed, that I was actually someone else entirely. It started 3 weeks after my mom passed away. Margaret Foster, the woman I called mom my entire life. She had been sick for 18 months. The kind of sick where you know the end is coming, where you watch someone slowly fade, where you have time to say all the things you need to say. Or at least, you think you do. She had stage 4 cancer, started in her pancreas, spread everywhere. The doctors gave her 6 months. She made it to 18, stubborn until the very end. That was mom. Always pushing, always fighting, always determined to do things her own way. I spent those 18 months by her side, as much as I could. I have a job, a husband, a life in the city, but every weekend I drove to the suburbs, to the house where I grew up, to sit with her, to help my dad, to be there. We talked about everything during those months. My childhood, her life, her regrets, her joys. We looked through old photo albums, told old stories, laughed, cried, said goodbye slowly, or so I thought. But there was one thing she never told me. One secret she kept until the very end. One truth she couldn't bring herself to speak. Instead, she left it in a box, hidden in the attic, hoping I would find it. Or maybe hoping I never would. I'll never know. She passed peacefully in her sleep. On a Tuesday morning in March, my dad was there. I was there, holding her hand. She took one last breath, and then she was gone, just like that. After months of fighting, she finally let go. The funeral was beautiful. Sad, but beautiful. Lots of people came. She had been a teacher for 30 years. Elementary school, 3rd grade. So many former students showed up, now adults with their own children, all saying how much she meant to them, how she changed their lives, how she was the best teacher they ever had. I stood there listening to them, feeling proud, feeling grateful that she touched so many lives, feeling like I knew exactly who she was. A good woman, a dedicated teacher, a loving mother. I thought I knew her completely. I was wrong. After the funeral, my dad couldn't stay in the house anymore. Too many memories, too much grief, too much emptiness in every room. He's 75 years old now, has some health issues, arthritis, high blood pressure, some memory problems. Not serious, but enough. He decided to move into a retirement community, a nice place about 20 minutes away, smaller apartment, meals provided, activities, other people around. He thought it would be good for him, better than rattling around in that big house alone. That meant we had to clear out the house where I grew up, the house where my parents lived for 35 years. Every room filled with memories, every closet packed with decades of accumulated life. It was overwhelming just thinking about it. My dad asked me to help, said he couldn't do it alone, physically or emotionally. I understood. I took a week off work. My husband Michael understood, said he'd help on the weekend, but the weekdays would be just me and Dad, going through a lifetime of belongings. We started on a Monday morning. I drove to the house early. Dad had already made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I ate breakfast every morning as a kid, the same table where I did my homework, where we played board games on rainy days, where we had family dinners every night. Dad looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. Mom's passing had aged him. Grief does that. Takes something from you, leaves you hollowed out. He held his coffee cup with both hands, stared into it, finally looked up at me. He told me we should start with the easy stuff, the kitchen, the bathrooms, the everyday items that didn't carry much emotional weight. Save the hard stuff for later. The bedrooms, the office, the attic. I agreed. That made sense. Build up to the painful parts. We spent that first day in the kitchen, going through cabinets, sorting dishes, packing things Dad wanted to keep, donating things he didn't need. It was tedious, exhausting, but also therapeutic. The rhythm of it, the simple decisions. Keep or donate, yes or no. It was manageable. Tuesday we did the living room, the den, the guest bathroom, more of the same, sorting, packing, organizing, making piles, keep, donate, trash, the house slowly emptying, starting to look less like home and more like a shell. Wednesday we tackled the bedrooms. That was harder. Mom's clothes still in the closet, her jewelry on the dresser, her reading glasses on the nightstand, like she had just stepped out, like she might come back any moment. Dad couldn't do it. He left the room. I packed everything myself, crying the whole time. My old bedroom was easier. Most of my stuff had been moved out years ago, when I went to college, when I got my own apartment, when I got married. But there were still things. High school yearbooks, old dance costumes, childhood drawings, things Mom had saved because she couldn't bear to throw them away. I sat on my old bed, looked around the room. The walls were still painted the lavender color I picked when I was 13. The same curtains Mom made for me in high school. The same bookshelf Dad built when I was 10. This room held so much of my childhood, so much of who I was, or who I thought I was. Thursday, we did the office, Dad's workspace. File cabinets full of old tax returns, insurance documents, utility bills, years and years of paperwork. We sorted through it, kept what was legally necessary, shredded the rest. It took all day, boring, mechanical, but necessary. Friday, we saved for the attic. Neither of us wanted to go up there. It was the last frontier, the final space to clear, and we both knew it would be full of memory bombs. Things we hadn't seen in years, things that would break our hearts, things that would bring Mom back in painful, vivid detail. Dad couldn't climb the ladder anymore. His knees are bad, has trouble with balance. So I went up alone, with a flashlight, some trash bags, a box of tissues, ready to face whatever was up there. The attic was exactly how I remembered it from childhood. Low ceiling, exposed beams, that distinctive smell of old wood and dust and time. It was hot despite being March. Stuffy, hard to breathe. I pushed open the small window at the far end, let some air in. Boxes everywhere, stacked against the walls, piled in corners, some labeled, most not. Christmas decorations in one area, old furniture covered with sheets in another. A lifetime of accumulation, things too precious to throw away, but not useful enough to keep downstairs. I started with the boxes nearest the attic entrance. Old tax returns from the 70s and 80s, Mom's teaching materials, lesson plans, student artwork she couldn't bear to discard, Dad's old work files, engineering blueprints, project folders. Nothing interesting, just the debris of working lives. I worked my way deeper into the attic, found boxes of my baby clothes. Mom had saved everything, every outfit, every little shoe, every blanket. I sat there going through them. Tiny clothes that once fit me, impossibly small. I thought about my own future. Michael and I had talked about kids. Maybe someday, maybe soon, maybe these clothes would be useful again. I found boxes of photo albums, hundreds of pictures, my entire childhood documented. Birthday parties, holidays, school events, family vacations, all of us smiling, looking happy, looking like a normal family. I flipped through them, crying, remembering, missing Mom, missing those simpler times. Then I moved to the far back corner, behind everything else, where the roof sloped down lowest, where you had to crouch to fit. There were boxes back there I'd never seen before, boxes that looked like they'd been deliberately hidden, pushed as far back as possible, where no one would casually stumble across them. One box in particular caught my attention. Plain cardboard, unmarked, sealed with heavy packing tape that had yellowed with age. Something about it felt significant, important, different from all the other boxes. I don't know how to explain it, just a feeling, an intuition. I pulled it out from the corner. It was heavier than I expected. Not heavy like books, but heavy like it was full of substantial things, important things. I dragged it toward the center of the attic, where there was more light from the window, where I could see better. I used my keys to cut through the old tape. It was so brittle it almost crumbled, like it had been sealed for decades. I opened the flaps, looked inside, and my entire world shifted. The box was full of files, folders, documents, all neatly organized, all carefully preserved, like someone had intentionally created an archive, a record of something important, something secret, something that needed to be hidden but also remembered. The first thing I saw was a newspaper article, yellowed with age, carefully protected in a plastic sleeve. The header said Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. The date was June 5th, 1985, 40 years ago, almost exactly. The headline made my breath catch. Newborn baby stolen from hospital. Family desperate for answers. Below it was a photo, a young couple, early 20s maybe, holding a press conference, microphones in front of them. The woman was crying. The man had his arm around her. Both looked devastated, destroyed, like their world had ended. I started reading the article. A 2-day-old baby girl had been taken from Mercy Hospital in Milwaukee. The mother had been in her room recovering. A woman dressed as a nurse came in, said she needed to take the baby for routine tests. The mother handed over the baby. The woman left, and never came back. The hospital went into lockdown. Police were called. FBI got involved, but the baby was gone, vanished, along with a nurse named Margaret Sullivan who was supposed to be working that shift. Her car was found abandoned in the parking lot, but she was nowhere to be found. The baby's name was Isabel Marie Hartman, born June 3rd, 1985, to parents Daniel and Karen Hartman. They were pleading for anyone with information to come forward, begging for their daughter's safe return, offering a reward, doing everything they could. I stared at that article for a long time. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. Why would my parents have this? Why would they keep a newspaper clipping about a kidnapped baby? It didn't make sense. No, that was impossible. That was insane. But my birthday was June 3rd, 1985, and I was born in Wisconsin. At least that's what my birth certificate said. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But I always assumed it was a normal birth, a normal adoption, not this. I pulled out more articles from the folder, all following the same case. Milwaukee baby still missing after 1 week. No leads in hospital abduction case. FBI expands search for missing infant. Article after article, week after week, month after month. The articles tracked the case over years. On the first anniversary, the police held another press conference. Daniel and Karen Hartman were there again, older, more tired, but still hoping, still believing their daughter was out there somewhere. On the 5th anniversary, there was another article, smaller this time, on an inside page. The case had gone cold. No new leads, no new information, but the parents refused to give up. They had started a foundation to help other families of missing children, to keep Isabel's case in the public eye. On the 10th anniversary, just a small mention. The case remained unsolved. The parents still hoped, but police had no active leads. The trail was completely cold. Baby Isabel Hartman remained missing. There were age progression photos, computer-generated images showing what Isabel might look like at age 5, at age 10, at age 15, at age 20, at age 25. I stared at these photos, and I felt sick because they looked like me, exactly like me. My face, my features, my everything. The 5-year-old had my nose, my eyes. The 10-year-old had my smile, my hair. The teenage version looked exactly like my school photos from that age. The adult version could have been my driver's license photo. It was uncanny, impossible, terrifying. I kept digging through the box, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. There was a folder labeled Hospital Records. Inside were documents from Mercy Hospital, copies of medical records, from the maternity ward, from June 1985. There was a birth certificate, but not mine, not Rebecca Foster's. This one said Isabel Marie Hartman, born June 3rd, 1985, at Mercy Hospital, Milwaukee. Parents, Daniel Joseph Hartman and Karen Marie Hartman. This was the real one, the original. Before I became Rebecca, there were hospital bracelets, tiny pink ones, with baby girl Hartman printed on them. There were footprints, ink prints of tiny newborn feet, taken hours after birth, standard hospital procedure. These were my feet, my actual baby footprints. There were medical records from those first 2 days, APGAR scores, feeding logs, nursing notes, all documenting the first 48 hours of Isabel Hartman's life, my life. Before I was taken, before I became someone else. There was another folder, this one labeled Identity Documents. Inside were papers showing name changes. Margaret Sullivan became Margaret Foster. Robert Sullivan became Robert Foster. Legal documents, court filings, they had changed their identities, created new people, new history, new everything. There were fake documents too. A birth certificate for Rebecca Foster, born June 3rd, 1985. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to parents Margaret and Robert Foster. But it was fake. The paper was wrong. The seal was wrong. It was a forgery. My entire legal identity was based on a forgery. There were documents showing their movements over the years. They left Milwaukee immediately after taking me, drove to Minnesota, stayed there for 6 months, then moved to Iowa, another 6 months, then to Missouri. Always moving, always changing locations, always staying ahead of any potential investigation. They moved 5 times in my first 2 years of life, always to small towns, always paying cash for rent, always working jobs that paid under the table, always avoiding anything that would create a paper trail, always running, always hiding. Then, when I was about 2.5, they moved to Chicago, settled in the suburbs, started using their new identities more openly, got proper jobs, started building a more normal life, but they were still cautious, still careful, still aware that they were living a lie. There was a folder full of newspaper clippings they had collected over the years. Every article about missing children, every story about families searching for kidnapped babies, every piece about adoption fraud. They had been following these stories, watching, waiting, wondering if anyone would connect the dots. There were articles about the Hartman family specifically, updates over the years, the foundation they started, the advocacy work they did, the other families they helped. Daniel and Karen Hartman had turned their tragedy into a mission to help others, to keep searching, to never give up hope. Then I found the journal, a composition notebook, the kind with the black and white speckled cover. I recognized it immediately. Mom used these for everything: grocery lists, lesson plans, notes to herself. I had seen hundreds of these over the years, but never this one. I opened it with trembling hands. The first entry was dated June 4th, 1985, the day after Isabel was born, the day after I was born. Mom's handwriting, younger, messier, emotional. She wrote about seeing the baby in the hospital, about how beautiful she was, about how the mother seemed so young, so unprepared, so overwhelmed. She wrote about the unfairness of it, how this young girl had gotten pregnant accidentally, didn't even seem to want the baby, while Mom had been trying for years, had gone through fertility treatments, had endured loss after loss, had wanted a baby more than anything. She wrote about the resentment building, the anger, the bitterness. Why did irresponsible teenagers get to have babies while responsible adults couldn't? Where was the fairness in that? Where was the justice? Then she wrote about the decision. It wasn't planned. She didn't wake up that morning intending to take a baby, but she was working the maternity ward. She had access. She knew the routines. She knew when mothers were alone, when babies were vulnerable. She wrote about going into Karen Hartman's room, about telling her she needed to take the baby for tests, about how easy it was, how Karen just handed Isabel over, trusting, unsuspecting, not knowing that her daughter was about to disappear forever. She wrote about walking out of that hospital with me in her arms, about going to her car, about driving away, about calling Robert, about telling him what she had done, about his shock, his horror, but also his acceptance, because he wanted a child too. He wanted to be a father, and here was their chance. The journal entries continued, day by day at first, then weekly, then monthly, documenting their life on the run, the constant moving, the fear, the paranoia, the guilt, but also the joy, because they had a baby, they had me, the child they always wanted. Mom wrote about every milestone, my first smile, my first laugh, my first word, my first step, all the normal parent things, but with this underlying current of fear, of knowing it could all end, that someone could find out, that they could lose me, that they could go to prison. She wrote about the guilt. It never went away. She thought about Karen Hartman constantly, about the pain she must be feeling, about the hole in her life. But Mom couldn't bring herself to give me back, couldn't undo what she had done. She loved me too much, even though she knew it was wrong. Years passed in the journal. Entries became less frequent, more normal. They settled in Chicago, started living more openly. I started school, made friends, had a regular childhood. Mom wrote about how happy I was, how well-adjusted, how loved. She convinced herself that she had done the right thing, that I was better off with them, that Karen Hartman had probably moved on, had other children, had forgotten about me. But every year on June 3rd, my birthday, there was an entry about the guilt, about Karen and Daniel, about wondering how they were, about hoping they had found peace, about knowing they probably hadn't. These entries were raw, painful, full of regret, but also full of love for me. She was torn between two truths, that she had done something terrible, and that she loved me with everything she had. The last entry was from 3 months ago, shortly after her diagnosis. When she knew she didn't have much time left, she wrote about wanting to tell me the truth, about needing me to know, but being too afraid, too ashamed, too worried about losing me in her final months. She wrote about leaving this box, about hiding it where I would probably find it eventually, after she was gone, when it wouldn't matter anymore what I thought of her. She wrote that she hoped I could understand, that she hoped I could forgive her, that she hoped I would know everything she did came from a place of desperate love, even if it was wrong, even if it destroyed lives, even if it was unforgivable. She ended the last entry by saying she loved me, that I was the best thing that ever happened to her. That being my mother, even if she had no right to be, was the greatest joy of her life. She hoped I would find my real family, that I would give them closure, that I would tell them what happened, and that maybe somehow something good could come from this tragedy. I sat in that attic for hours, reading everything, looking at every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. The sun moved across the sky. The light changed. I barely noticed. I was lost in this alternate reality, this other life, this truth that had been hidden from me for 40 years. My dad called up eventually, asked if I was okay, asked if I needed help, asked what was taking so long. I couldn't answer, couldn't speak. My voice was gone. My words were gone. Everything was gone except this box and these truths and this impossible situation. Finally, I climbed down from the attic, the box in my arms, heavy with secrets, heavy with decades of lies, heavy with the weight of stolen identity and desperate love and unforgivable crimes. Dad was in the living room, sitting in his chair. He looked up when I came down, saw my face, saw the box, and he knew, immediately. He knew what I had found. His face went white. He stood up, then sat back down heavily, like his legs couldn't hold him. I put the box on the coffee table, right between us, opened it, pulled out the articles, the birth certificate, the journal, laid them all out. Then I asked him the only question that mattered. I asked him if it was true, if all of this was real. He looked at the documents for a long time, not reading them, just looking, like he was saying goodbye to something. Finally, he nodded, tears streaming down his face. It was all true, every word, every terrible word. He told me they had planned to tell me so many times over the years, but they were always too scared. Scared I would hate them, scared I would leave, scared they would lose the only thing that mattered, me. He said Mom had written me a letter too, to go with the box, to explain everything in her own words. He got up slowly, went to his bedroom, came back with an envelope, my name written on it in Mom's handwriting. He handed it to me, said he would give me privacy to read it. Then he left the room. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were several pages, handwritten, in Mom's familiar script. I started reading, and I cried through every single word. She started by apologizing, over and over. She said she knew sorry wasn't enough, could never be enough, but it was all she had. She was sorry for taking me, sorry for lying, sorry for stealing 40 years from my real family, sorry for building my life on a crime. She explained everything, the years of infertility, the failed treatments, the repeated losses, the grief, the depression, the desperate aching need for a child, the feeling that life was passing her by, that she would never be a mother, that something fundamental was missing from her existence. She wrote about seeing young mothers in the hospital, how easy pregnancy seemed for some people, how unfair it felt. She wrote about the resentment building, the bitterness, the anger at the universe. Why was this so easy for people who didn't even want it, and so impossible for people who did? She wrote about seeing Karen Hartman in the hospital, about thinking she looked so young, so unprepared. She wrote about projecting all her own pain onto this stranger, about convincing herself that Karen didn't really want the baby, that she would be better off without the responsibility, that Isabel would be better off with someone who really wanted her. She knew it was crazy. She knew it was wrong. She knew she was rationalizing an unforgivable act. But in that moment, something in her mind broke. Something snapped, and she acted without thinking, took the baby, took me, and disappeared. She wrote about the first few months, the constant fear, the paranoia, jumping at every knock on the door, changing locations constantly, never staying anywhere long enough to establish roots, living in cheap motels and short-term rentals, paying cash for everything, avoiding anything that would leave a trail. She wrote about how hard it was on their marriage, the stress, the guilt. Robert wanted to turn themselves in so many times, but she couldn't do it, couldn't give me up, couldn't lose me, so they kept running, kept hiding, kept building this life based on a lie. She wrote about settling in Chicago, about finally feeling safe enough to stay in one place, about creating a normal life, about enrolling me in school, about making friends, about becoming part of a community, about trying to forget that it had all started with a crime. She wrote about raising me, about how much joy I brought to her life, about every milestone, every achievement, every moment. She said I was everything she had dreamed of, everything she had wanted. That being my mother was the greatest gift of her life, even if she had stolen it, even if she had no right to it. She wrote about the guilt that never went away, about thinking of Karen Hartman every single day, about imagining her pain, her loss, her grief, about knowing she had caused it, about living with that knowledge, about carrying that weight. She wrote about wanting to confess so many times, about drafting letters to the police, about picking up the phone to turn herself in, but always stopping, always pulling back, because she couldn't lose me, couldn't face prison, couldn't undo what had been done. She wrote about getting sick, about knowing her time was limited, about wanting to tell me the truth face to face, but being too weak, too ashamed, too afraid of dying with me hating her. So she left this box instead, this record, this confession. She ended the letter by telling me what to do next. She said I needed to go to the police, needed to tell them everything, needed to give them this box, needed to find my real family. They deserved to know what happened. They deserved closure after 40 years. They deserved to have their daughter back. She said she knew this would change everything, would destroy my memory of her, would make me question everything about my childhood. But she wanted me to know that her love was real, even if everything else was a lie. She loved me with everything she had, and nothing about that was fake. She said she hoped someday I could forgive her, not for taking me, that was unforgivable, but for loving me, for giving me the best childhood she could, for trying to be a good mother, even if she had no right to be my mother at all. She ended by saying goodbye, by saying she loved me, by saying she was sorry, by saying she hoped I would find peace, find my real family, find my real identity, and find a way to live with this impossible truth. I read that letter 3 times, sitting alone in the living room, crying, grieving, not just for Mom who had just passed, but for everything, for the person I thought I was, for Rebecca Foster who never really existed, for the childhood built on lies, for the real parents who lost me, for the life I should have had, for all of it. Dad came back eventually, sat across from me. We didn't talk for a long time, just sat in silence. Finally, I asked him what I should do. He said I should go to the police, should find the Hartmans, should tell them everything, even though it meant he would probably go to prison, even though it meant losing everything. It was the right thing to do. I asked him if he regretted it, taking me, raising me, living this lie. He thought for a long time. Then he said it was complicated. He regretted the pain it caused, the crime, the lives destroyed, but he didn't regret me, didn't regret being my father, didn't regret the 40 years we had, even if they were built on something terrible. He said he loved me, that I was his daughter, that nothing would ever change that. Not the truth, not prison, not anything. He was my dad. He would always be my dad, no matter what. I left that day with the box, drove home in a daze. Michael was there. He knew immediately something was catastrophically wrong. I showed him everything, the articles, the documents, the letter. He was shocked, horrified, couldn't believe it, but also supportive. He held me while I cried, said we would figure this out together, said he loved me no matter who I was, Rebecca or Isabel, or both. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything, about the Hartmans, about Karen who had handed me to a nurse 40 years ago and never saw me again, about Daniel who had spent 4 decades searching, about the life I should have had, the family I should have known. I thought about my identity. Was I Rebecca? Was I Isabel? I had lived 40 years as Rebecca Foster. That was my name, my life, my memories. But it was all based on a lie, based on a crime, based on theft. But Isabel Hartman was a stranger, a 2-day-old baby who was taken before she could become anyone. I had no memories of being Isabel, no connection to that name, no attachment to that identity. How could I become someone I never was? The next morning, I called in sick to work, told them I had a family emergency, which was true, just not the kind of family emergency anyone could imagine. Then I called a lawyer, explained the situation, asked what I should do. The lawyer said I needed to go to the police immediately, that this was evidence of a serious crime, that there was no statute of limitations on kidnapping, that my father could be prosecuted, that I had a legal obligation to report it. She also said I should prepare myself, that this would become public, that the media would be all over it. A 40-year-old cold case solved. A kidnapped baby found alive. It would be a huge story. My life would be turned upside down. Privacy would be impossible. That afternoon, I went to the Chicago Police Department, brought the box with me, asked to speak to someone about a cold case. They brought me to a detective. I told him I had information about a kidnapping from 1985, a baby taken from a hospital in Milwaukee. He looked at me strangely, asked how I would know about a 40-year-old case. I took a deep breath, told him I was the baby, that I had just found out, that my parents who raised me were the kidnappers, that I had evidence. I opened the box, showed him everything. He stared at the documents for a long time, then he made a phone call, then another. Soon I was in an interview room with multiple detectives, FBI agents, people from Milwaukee. Everyone wanted to hear the story. I told them everything, showed them everything, answered every question. They were stunned, couldn't believe it. A case they thought would never be solved, suddenly solved by the victim herself. They took the box, cataloged everything, started making arrangements. They needed to verify everything, do DNA tests, contact the Milwaukee police, contact the Hartmans. They also told me they would need to arrest my father, that he was an accessory, that he had known about the kidnapping and helped cover it up for 40 years. I understood. It was the law, but it still broke my heart. He was my dad. Even if everything else was wrong, he was still my dad. The DNA test happened 2 days later. They compared my DNA to samples the Hartmans had provided decades ago when Isabel first went missing. The results came back quickly. Positive match. I was definitely Isabel Marie Hartman, daughter of Daniel and Karen, taken 40 years ago, finally found. Then came the hardest part, contacting the Hartmans. The police wanted to tell them in person, to prepare them, to make sure they had support. They arranged for detectives to go to their home in Milwaukee, to tell them that their daughter had been found, that after 40 years, Isabel was coming home. I can't imagine what that moment was like for them. 40 years of grief, of wondering, of hoping, of fearing the worst, suddenly answered. Their daughter was alive. She had been found. She wanted to meet them. The police gave them my contact information, told them I wanted to connect, that I needed time to process, but that I wanted to build a relationship. Karen called me that same day. I saw the Milwaukee area code. My hand shook as I answered. Her voice was shaking, crying. She said my name, Isabel, said it over and over, like she was trying to make it real, like she couldn't believe it was true. I told her I was here, I was real, I was her daughter. We talked for 2 hours that first call. She told me about the day I was born, about holding me for those 2 days, about how perfect I was, about how much she loved me instantly, about the moment I was taken, about the 40 years of searching, of never giving up, of always believing I was out there. She told me about my biological father, Daniel, about how the grief nearly destroyed their marriage, about how they almost didn't survive it, but they held on, for me, for the hope that someday I would come home. She told me about my brothers, James and Lucas, born 6 and 8 years after I was taken. Younger brothers I never knew I had. She said they grew up knowing about me, knowing they had a sister somewhere, a big sister who was missing. They wanted to meet me too. I told her about my life, about being raised as Rebecca Foster, about my childhood, about my education, about my career, about Michael. She listened to everything, crying. She said she was grateful I had been loved, grateful I had been safe, grateful I had had a good life, even if it was with the people who took me. We made plans to meet, in person. She wanted to come to Chicago, wanted to see me as soon as possible. We arranged it for the following weekend, Saturday afternoon, at my house. I wanted her to see where I lived, how I lived, the life I had built. That week was surreal. The story broke in the news. 40-year-old kidnapping case solved, missing baby found alive. My name was everywhere. Rebecca Foster, who was actually Isabel Hartman. Photos of me, photos of the Hartmans, photos from 40 years ago. The media camped outside my house, called constantly, wanted interviews, wanted my story. I said no to all of it. I wasn't ready, needed time, needed privacy, needed to process everything before I could talk about it publicly. My dad was arrested, charged as an accessory. He didn't fight it, pleaded guilty immediately, cooperated fully, because of his age, his cooperation, the unique circumstances. He received a suspended sentence, probation. He wouldn't go to prison, but he lost everything else. His reputation, his standing in the community, his daughter's trust. Saturday came, the day I would meet my biological parents, my real parents. I was terrified. Michael was there for support. We cleaned the house, made coffee, waited. They arrived right on time, 3 o'clock. I watched from the window as they got out of their car. Karen was tall, thin, with graying brown hair. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Daniel was next to her, also tall, balding. He had his arm around her, supporting her, both of them nervous, emotional, scared. I opened the door before they could knock. We stood there staring at each other, these strangers who were my parents. After 40 years, finally face to face. Karen moved first, walked toward me slowly, like she was afraid I might disappear. She stopped a few feet away, just looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Then she whispered my name, Isabel, my real name, and she opened her arms. I stepped into her embrace. This woman I didn't remember. This woman who gave birth to me. This woman who had been grieving for 40 years. She held me so tight, sobbing, saying my name over and over. Isabel, my baby, my daughter, you're here. You're really here? Daniel joined the hug, both of them holding me, all of us crying. Michael stood back, giving us space. This moment belonged to them, to us. This family reunited after 4 decades. We went inside, sat in the living room, and they told me everything, their whole story. From their perspective, every detail, every moment. Karen told me about being 22 when she got pregnant, about how excited they were, their first baby. She told me about the pregnancy, normal, healthy, no complications. She told me about going into labor, about the delivery, about hearing me cry for the first time, about holding me skin to skin, about counting my fingers and toes, about falling completely in love. She told me about those first 2 days in the hospital, about nursing me, about changing my diapers, about just staring at me, unable to believe she had created this perfect tiny human. She told me about naming me Isabel, after her grandmother, and Marie, after Daniel's mother. I was named with love, with intention, with hope for my future. She told me about the morning of the 3rd day, about a nurse coming in. She didn't recognize her, but it was a big hospital, lots of staff. The nurse said she needed to take me for routine tests. Karen didn't question it, trusted her, handed me over. An hour passed. Karen started to wonder when I would be back. Another hour. She called the nurses' station. They didn't know what she was talking about. No tests had been ordered. No nurse had taken the baby. Karen started panicking, screaming. They searched everywhere. I was gone. The hospital went into lockdown. Security checked every room, every floor, every exit. But I was already gone. Margaret Sullivan, the nurse who took me, had clocked out, left. Her car was found in the parking lot, but she was nowhere to be found. Karen told me about the next hours, days, weeks, the police investigation, the FBI involvement, the media coverage, the community search, everyone looking, everyone hoping, but no sign of me, no leads, no information, nothing. She told me about the grief, the guilt, the blame. She blamed herself for handing me to that nurse, for not being more protective, for not questioning why tests were needed, for trusting too easily. The guilt nearly destroyed her. Daniel told me about his experience, about feeling helpless, about wanting to fix it but not knowing how, about driving around for weeks, looking in every park, every store, every random place, hoping to somehow find me, never finding anything. He told me about their marriage nearly falling apart. The grief drove a wedge between them. They couldn't support each other because they were both drowning. They separated for 6 months, but eventually came back together because they realized they only had each other who truly understood the pain. They told me about the years of searching, about hiring private investigators, about following every lead, every tip, every possible sighting, about the false hopes, the crushing disappointments, about age progression photos, about anniversaries spent holding press conferences, begging for information. They told me about deciding to have more children. It wasn't about replacing me. They said that over and over. I could never be replaced, but they wanted to be parents, wanted to give love, wanted to create life. So they had James, then Lucas, 2 boys who grew up knowing about their missing sister. Karen told me about keeping my room, for years, a nursery that was never used. Eventually they converted it. But she said there was always a space, always a hole, always something missing, always a daughter who should have been there but wasn't. She told me about the foundation they started, helping other families of missing children, advocating for better hospital security, working with law enforcement, keeping Isabel's case active, never giving up, never stopping, never accepting that I was gone forever. Then she told me about getting the call from the police 4 days ago, saying I had been found, that their daughter was alive, that I wanted to meet them. She said she collapsed, couldn't breathe, couldn't process it. After 40 years, after giving up hope so many times, after resigning herself to never knowing, suddenly I was back. Daniel said the same thing, that he didn't believe it at first, thought it was a cruel hoax, some kind of scam, but the police showed them evidence, DNA results, documents. It was real. I was real. Their daughter had come home. They told me about the last 4 days. Unable to sleep, unable to eat, unable to think about anything except meeting me. They brought photo albums, showed me pictures of them as young parents, pictures of me as a newborn, pictures from the hospital, from those first 2 days. I looked at those photos, saw baby me in their arms, saw them looking at me with such love, such joy, not knowing that in hours I would be taken, that their world was about to shatter, that they wouldn't see me again for 40 years. They showed me age progression photos they had made over the years, trying to imagine what I looked like. Some were close, some weren't, but all of them were done with love, with hope, with the desperate need to picture their daughter, to imagine her growing up, to believe she was out there somewhere. Karen gave me something, a small teddy bear, worn, faded, one eye missing. She said it was from the hospital, from my bassinet. It was mine. The only thing they had left from those 2 days. They had kept it all these years. She wanted me to have it back. I held that bear and cried. This was mine, from when I was brand new. The only physical connection to those first days of my life. The only thing that had been with me before I was Rebecca, before I was anyone. We talked for hours that day. They asked about my life, every detail. They wanted to know everything. My childhood, my education, my career, my marriage. They were hungry for 40 years of information, desperate to know everything they had missed. I told them about growing up in Chicago, about my childhood. It was good. That was the truth. Margaret and Robert loved me, gave me a stable home, good education, opportunities. I never wanted for anything material, but I also told them it was all based on a lie, that my entire identity was fake, that learning the truth had shattered everything I thought I knew about myself. Karen said she was grateful I had been loved, that I had been safe, that I had had opportunities. But she also said 40 years had been stolen, from all of us. From her and Daniel, who should have raised me. From me, who should have known my real family. From James and Lucas, who should have had their sister. All of it stolen by Margaret's desperate act. Before they left that day, Karen asked if they could see me again, soon, if we could start building a relationship. They didn't want to rush me, didn't want to pressure me, but they had waited 40 years. They didn't want to wait anymore. I said yes. I wanted that too. I needed to know them, needed to understand where I came from, needed to build something with my real family, no matter how hard it would be. Over the next weeks and months, I built a relationship with the Hartmans, video calls at first, then regular visits, sometimes in Milwaukee, sometimes in Chicago, getting to know each other, slowly, carefully. I met James and Lucas, my brothers. They were 34 and 32, both married with kids of their own. They welcomed me immediately, said they had always wanted to meet their big sister, had always known about me, had always hoped I would come home. It was strange being the oldest sibling but the newest family member. They had 40 years of history, inside jokes, shared memories. I had nothing. I was starting from scratch, but they were patient, inclusive. They made space for me in their lives. I met my biological grandparents, Karen's parents. They were in their 80s now. They cried when they met me, said they had prayed for this day, had never stopped hoping, never stopped believing I would come home. I was named after Karen's grandmother, my great-grandmother, who had passed away 20 years ago. Never knowing I had been found, I met aunts and uncles, cousins, an entire extended family I never knew existed. They all welcomed me. All remembered the day I was taken. All had followed the case over the years. All were amazed I had been found. I started going to family gatherings, holidays, birthdays, learning traditions I had missed, hearing family stories I wasn't part of, looking at photo albums where I should have been but wasn't. It was bittersweet, beautiful, but painful. Karen and I developed our own relationship separate from the larger family. We had lunch regularly, just the two of us. She told me stories about her life, about her hopes and dreams when she was young, about her grief over losing me, about her journey to healing. I told her about my life, about Rebecca Foster, about the good parts and the complicated parts, about my struggle with identity, about not knowing who I was anymore. She listened without judgment, without bitterness. She said I could be both, Rebecca and Isabel. I didn't have to choose. Daniel and I bonded over shared interests. We both loved hiking. We started going on weekend hikes together, just the two of us. He told me about the years of searching, about leads that went nowhere, about the pain of every anniversary, about the guilt of moving on with life when I was still missing. I learned about my heritage. I was half Swedish from Karen's side, half Irish from Daniel's side. I learned about family history, about ancestors who immigrated generations ago, about where my last name came from, about who I was genetically. All information I never had as Rebecca Foster. The media attention was intense at first, but eventually it died down. The story moved out of the news cycle. Life slowly returned to some semblance of normal, or at least a new normal. I struggled with my feelings about Margaret and Robert, about the people who raised me. Margaret was gone. I couldn't confront her, couldn't ask her questions, couldn't tell her how I felt. She had left me the letter, the box, the explanations, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Robert was still alive, on probation, living in a small apartment near the retirement community he was supposed to move into. We talked occasionally, brief, awkward. I couldn't cut him out completely. He was my dad. He raised me. But I also couldn't forget what he did, the lie he lived, the crime he helped cover up. He apologized constantly, said he knew sorry wasn't enough, said he understood if I never forgave him, said he loved me, would always love me, even if I hated him. I told him I didn't hate him, but I didn't know what I felt. It was too complicated, too messy. My relationship with Michael was strained for a while, not because of anything he did, but because I was struggling so much with my identity. I didn't know who I was anymore, didn't know how to be a wife when I didn't know how to be myself. But he was patient, supportive. He reminded me that I was still me, that I was still the woman he fell in love with, that my name might have changed, my history might have changed, but my core, myself, that was still the same. I started therapy, needed help processing everything, the trauma of discovery, the grief of losing my identity, the complexity of two families, the anger at Margaret, the confusion about my feelings for Robert, the struggle to connect with the Hartmans, all of it. My therapist helped me understand that identity is complex, that I could honor both lives I had lived. Rebecca Foster existed. She was real. She lived 40 years, had experiences, made memories, built a life. That didn't disappear just because the foundation was false. Isabel Hartman also existed. She was the genetic truth, the biological reality, the person I was born to be. Learning about her, connecting with her family, that was reclaiming something that had been stolen. I could be both. Rebecca Isabel, Foster Hartman, a hyphenated identity, a merged self, both sides honored, both sides real, both sides true. I legally changed my name, Rebecca Isabel Foster Hartman. That's who I am now. Both names, both identities, both families represented. I updated all my documents, my driver's license, my passport, my social security card, making it official, making it real. The first time I signed my new name, I cried. Because it felt right. Like I was finally being honest, finally living in truth. No more secrets, no more lies. Just me, all of me. The complicated, messy, beautiful truth of who I am. Today I have two families. The Hartmans, who I was born into, who I am building a relationship with, who I am learning to love, and the Fosters, or what's left of them. Robert, the extended relatives, the people who raised me, even though it was all based on a crime. They were still my family for 40 years. I spend holidays with both now, Thanksgiving with the Hartmans, Christmas with Robert, or alternating years, finding balance, making space for everyone. It's complicated, sometimes uncomfortable, but it's my reality. My truth, my family situation. Karen has become important to me, not quite a mother. I already had one, even if she took me illegally, but something. A maternal figure, a biological connection, someone who loves me in a deep, primal way. Because I came from her, because she thought she lost me forever. Because having me back is a miracle she never expected. I look like her. That's the strangest part. All my life I didn't look like anyone. Didn't have that experience of seeing yourself reflected in a parent's face. Now I do. I have Karen's eyes, her smile, her hands. I move like her, laugh like her. It's uncanny. It's beautiful. It's proof that I came from her, that I belong to her. Biologically, genetically, truly. Daniel treats me like a daughter, even though I'm 40 years old and we just met. He worries about me, asks about my job, my marriage, my life. He wants to be involved, wants to make up for lost time. I let him, because he's my dad, my biological dad, and he loves me, in his own quiet way. James and Lucas are the brothers I always wished I had. We get along well, text constantly, share memes. Inside jokes are developing. We're building something. Family bonds that should have been there all along, better late than never. My nieces and nephews call me Aunt Rebecca, or sometimes Aunt Isabel. They're confused about which name to use. I tell them either is fine. Both are me. They accept this easily. Kids are good at accepting complicated truths. Better than adults usually. Michael and I are good now. Stronger, actually. Going through something this traumatic, this identity shattering. It either breaks a marriage or makes it stronger. Ours got stronger. He's my rock, my constant, my reminder that I'm still me. No matter what name I use, no matter what family I belong to, I'm grateful for my life now. All of it. The good and the bad. The truth and the lies. The stolen beginning, the loved childhood, the shattered identity, the found family. All of it shaped me, made me who I am, taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. I'm grateful I found that box. Even though it destroyed everything, even though it shattered my world, even though it forced me to confront impossible truths, I'm grateful. Because now I know. Now I have answers. Now I have my biological family. Now I live in truth. To anyone who discovers something similar, that your adoption was actually a kidnapping, that your whole life was based on a lie, that your real family is out there, I want to tell you this. You will survive. It will be hard. It will be painful. It will be confusing. But you will survive. You can love multiple families. You can grieve for what was stolen. You can be angry at the lies. You can still appreciate the love you received. All of these things can coexist. All of these things are valid. All of these things are true. Your identity is yours to define. Not defined by genetics alone. Not defined by who raised you alone, but by who you choose to be. How you integrate all these complicated truths. How you move forward. That's who you are. To biological parents who have lost children to kidnapping, don't give up hope. Keep searching, keep believing. 40 years seems impossible. But miracles happen. I am proof. I came home. After 4 decades. Your child might too. And when they do, when that miracle happens, love them without expectations, without demands, without pressure. Just love, just acceptance, just gratitude. They've been through trauma too, even if they don't remember you, even if they lived a good life elsewhere. The discovery is traumatic. Be patient. Be kind. Be present. To people who discover their parents committed crimes, who learn that the people who raised you did terrible things, it's okay to still love them. It's okay to grieve for them. Love and accountability can coexist. You can acknowledge they did wrong and still appreciate what they gave you. This doesn't make you complicit. This makes you human. I'm 40 years old. I've lived 2 lives. Rebecca Foster, Isabel Hartman. Now I'm learning to be both, to integrate them, to honor both, to live authentically, as all of me. It's hard. It's complicated. But it's also beautiful, because I know who I am now, where I came from, why I exist. I have answers. I have family. I have truth, finally. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've been through something similar, if you've discovered late in life that you were taken, if you've found your biological family after decades, if you're navigating the complexity of multiple families and multiple identities, I'd love to hear from you. Where you are now, how you coped, how you healed, what helped, what didn't. I'm still figuring it all out, still learning, still growing, but I'm grateful for all of it. The pain and the healing, the lies and the truth, the loss and the finding, all of it, because all of it brought me here, to this moment, to this truth, to this family, to this life. And despite everything, despite the lies and the crime and the stolen years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.